My name is Colin Beckett, and I've been a funeral director for nearly 2 decades. Most people assume this work is about compassion and closure, about helping families navigate grief with grace. But the truth is, my job is about control. Not control in the sense of authority, but the kind that holds the edges of chaos together when everyone else is unraveling. You learn early that families don't really remember the hymns or who gave the eulogy. What they remember is whether the casket lid stayed closed, if their loved one looked serene, if anything at all went wrong during those fragile hours of goodbye. I'm telling you this because what happened last Thursday wasn't about grief. It was about mechanics, balance, temperature, and the quiet ways materials shift when pressure builds in the wrong places. That's what I wrote in the report anyway. But the truth is, I stood there for an hour and a half watching it happen. And tomorrow morning, I have to walk back into that same chapel and prepare another service. Maybe talking about it will help me stop seeing it every time I close my eyes. The family arrived at 2 p.m., the kind of gathering that fills every pew and spills into the hallway. The deceased was a woman in her early 70s, a retired teacher. Passed in her sleep, peaceful, nothing traumatic. We'd done clean work, minimal touch-up, just some tone correction and small adjustments near the eyes where the lids had settled. She looked calm, just as her family had asked. She wore a navy dress with a white collar, hands folded neatly, a small silver cross resting between them. The casket was oak, mid-range, champagne interior, hinges oiled, lid smooth, every detail double-checked that morning. The viewing platform had already been used several times that week, solid, level, locked into place with steel pins. Her son approached first, mid-40s, broad shoulders, quiet strength. He stood there a long time without a word. His wife joined him, then their daughter, then neighbors, cousins. The slow tide of mourners that fills a room with whispers and tissue sounds. I stood near the back, hands clasped, close enough to intervene, far enough to vanish into the background. The AC hummed low to 68 degrees, cool enough to keep the body stable, not so cold as to draw complaints. Around 2:45, I saw the first sign. It was minor, so subtle I almost convinced myself I'd imagined it. Her left hand seemed to have shifted slightly. Not lifted, just turned, the thumb brushing the side of the cross instead of lying flat. I stared for half a minute, wondering if the light through the stained glass had changed or if someone had brushed the platform and caused a tremor. Neither made sense. Still, I didn't move. Bodies settle, muscles relax, gravity reclaims what's left. It happens. I've seen it countless times. But then, a few minutes later, I saw the right hand move. Just a twitch. Fingers curling inward like a feather had grazed them. Reflexive. Except there shouldn't have been reflexes. Not after embalming. Formaldehyde locks everything down. I walked forward, calm, composed. Never alarmed. You can't look worried in front of a family. Worry spreads faster than truth. Up close, both hands were different now. The symmetry we'd crafted was gone. The left thumb pressed against the cross. The right fingers slightly curled, the tendons faintly visible. I gently readjusted the hands, cool, firm, exactly how they should feel. No warmth, no softness. Moments later, the daughter approached, late 30s, dark braid, carrying a bunch of wild daisies and black-eyed Susans. She laid them near her mother's shoulder, hand resting lightly on the polished wood. Her quiet crying blended into the steady hum of the room. That's when I felt it, a vibration. Faint low, like the floor itself was breathing. But there were no trucks outside, no movement nearby. I looked down. The platform was still locked, pins secure, but the vibration didn't fade. I felt it through my shoes, subtle, persistent. I caught my assistant's eye. 4 years working together, steady hands. He noticed too. He started toward me, slow, casual, pretending to check the guest book. We both knew something wasn't right. The son stepped forward again. He leaned in and kissed his mother's forehead. Something many do without thinking. But the shift of his weight tilted the platform just enough, half a degree, maybe. The woman's head rolled slightly to the left. He didn't see it, but I did. So did my assistant. I guided the sun back gently, then turned to fix the head's position. It resisted more than expected. I applied steady pressure until something inside gave a soft release, like air leaving a tight seal. By now, the vibration hadn't stopped. If anything, it had deepened. I crouched, pretending to adjust flowers, check the pins, the locks, everything solid. No reason for movement. But the hum continued. My assistant leaned in close. "Something's off with the base," he whispered. "I know," I said. "Should we stop the viewing?" I hesitated. Calling it off would mean questions, doubt. Families remember disruptions like scars, so I told him, "Not yet." "Keep watch." 20 minutes passed. Everything seemed fine, except the vibration never stopped. It was faint but alive, like something pulsing beneath us. Then, at 3:15, the right hand lifted. Not much, maybe half an inch, but it lifted. Fingers relaxed, palm turning upward as if to hold something unseen. I moved quickly but calmly. "Just adjusting the fabric," I told the son when he asked. He nodded, grateful not to know more. I repositioned the hand, this time using a small pin to secure the sleeve to the lining. A quiet test to see if it would move again. The minutes crawled. At 3:30, the pastor arrived, a thin, elderly man with kind eyes. He prayed quietly, then reached out and placed his hand over the deceased's. The moment contact was made, her body convulsed. Not a twitch. A violent jerk. Hands clenched, shoulders rose, the head snapped sideways. The pastor stumbled back, pale and speechless. The room froze. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, like everyone's mind was trying to make sense of what they'd seen. I moved fast, stepping forward, blocking the view. "It's all right," I said loud enough for all to hear. "Just a shift in the platform happens sometimes. It didn't, but I needed them something to believe." The assistant joined me, and together we steadied the casket. The platform was still locked tight, nothing out of place, no mechanical fault. But I couldn't tell them that. We worked quickly, repositioning her body. Her hands had stiffened. I had to pry the fingers apart, one by one. Her head was angled wrong. I turned it back gently until it settled with a faint hiss of escaping air. When we were done, she looked peaceful again, exactly as she had before. "Everything's secure now," I told the family. "Temperature can cause slight settling. It's nothing to worry about." The son looked at me. "She moved. The platform shifted," I said softly. He stared a moment longer, then nodded. People always want a reason that isn't supernatural. The service continued, quieter, tenser. The grief now carried a current of fear. By the time it ended, the vibration was still faintly there, just enough to make me feel it through the solace of my shoes. After the family left, my assistant and I stood alone. She still looked peaceful, but the air around the platform seemed to hum. "What now?" he asked. I hesitated. We were scheduled for burial at 9 a.m. We couldn't postpone. So we did what professionals do. We followed procedure. Checked everything once more. Repositioned, smoothed, confirmed. Then we closed the lid, locked it, sealed it. The vibration stopped the instant the latch clicked. I've gone over every possibility. Temperature, pressure, structure, none fit. But I know what I saw, what we both saw. Tomorrow morning, I'll open that chapel again. I'll check every lock, every hinge. And when we lower that casket into the earth, I'll be praying that whatever was still moving under that platform stays buried. Some things don't need explanations. Some just need to be sealed and left beneath the ground. That's what I learned last Thursday. And that's what I'll remember the next time someone asks if their loved one looks peaceful. My name is Colin Beckett, and I've been a funeral director for nearly 2 decades. Most people assume this work is about compassion and closure, about helping families navigate grief with grace. But the truth is, my job is about control. Not control in the sense of authority, but the kind that holds the edges of chaos together when everyone else is unraveling. You learn early that families don't really remember the hymns or who gave the eulogy. What they remember is whether the casket lid stayed closed, if their loved one looked serene, if anything at all, went wrong during those fragile hours of goodbye. I'm telling you this because what happened last Thursday wasn't about grief. It was about mechanics, balance, temperature, and the quiet ways materials shift when pressure builds in the wrong places. That's what I wrote in the report anyway. But the truth is, I stood there for an hour and a half watching it happen. And tomorrow morning, I have to walk back into that same chapel and prepare another service. Maybe talking about it will help me stop seeing it every time I close my eyes. The family arrived at 2 p.m., the kind of gathering that fills every pew and spills into the hallway. The deceased was a woman in her early 70s, a retired teacher. Passed in her sleep, peaceful, nothing traumatic. We'd done clean work, minimal touch-up, just some tone correction and small adjustments near the eyes where the lids had settled. She looked calm, just as her family had asked. She wore a navy dress with a white collar, hands folded neatly, a small silver cross resting between them. The casket was oak, mid-range, champagne interior, hinges oiled, lid smooth, every detail double-checked that morning. The viewing platform had already been used several times that week, solid, level, locked into place with steel pins. Her son approached first, mid-40s, broad shoulders, quiet strength. He stood there a long time without a word. His wife joined him, then their daughter, then neighbors, cousins. The slow tide of mourners that fills a room with whispers and tissue sounds. I stood near the back, hands clasped, close enough to intervene, far enough to vanish into the background. The AC hummed low to 68 degrees, cool enough to keep the body stable, not so cold as to draw complaints. Around 2:45, I saw the first sign. It was minor, so subtle I almost convinced myself I'd imagined it. Her left hand seemed to have shifted slightly. Not lifted, just turned, the thumb brushing the side of the cross instead of lying flat. I stared for half a minute, wondering if the light through the stained glass had changed or if someone had brushed the platform and caused a tremor. Neither made sense. Still, I didn't move. Bodies settle, muscles relax, gravity reclaims what's left. It happens. I've seen it countless times. But then, a few minutes later, I saw the right hand move. Just a twitch. Fingers curling inward like a feather had grazed them. Reflexive. Except there shouldn't have been reflexes. Not after embalming. Formaldehyde locks everything down. I walked forward, calm, composed. Never alarmed. You can't look worried in front of a family. Worry spreads faster than truth. Up close, both hands were different now. The symmetry we'd crafted was gone. The left thumb pressed against the cross. The right fingers slightly curled, the tendons faintly visible. I gently readjusted the hands, cool, firm, exactly how they should feel. No warmth, no softness. Moments later, the daughter approached, late 30s, dark braid, carrying a bunch of wild daisies and black-eyed Susans. She laid them near her mother's shoulder, hand resting lightly on the polished wood. Her quiet crying blended into the steady hum of the room. That's when I felt it, a vibration. Faint low, like the floor itself was breathing. But there were no trucks outside, no movement nearby. I looked down. The platform was still locked, pins secure, but the vibration didn't fade. I felt it through my shoes, subtle, persistent. I caught my assistant's eye. 4 years working together, steady hands. He noticed too. He started toward me, slow, casual, pretending to check the guest book. We both knew something wasn't right. The son stepped forward again. He leaned in and kissed his mother's forehead. Something many do without thinking. But the shift of his weight tilted the platform just enough, half a degree, maybe. The woman's head rolled slightly to the left. He didn't see it, but I did. So did my assistant. I guided the son back gently, then turned to fix the head's position. It resisted more than expected. I applied steady pressure until something inside gave a soft release, like air leaving a tight seal. By now, the vibration hadn't stopped. If anything, it had deepened. I crouched, pretending to adjust flowers, check the pins, the locks, everything solid. No reason for movement. But the hum continued. My assistant leaned in close. "Something's off with the bass," he whispered. I know, I said. Should we stop the viewing? I hesitated. Calling it off would mean questions, doubt. Families remember disruptions like scars, so I told him, not yet. Keep watch. 20 minutes passed. Everything seemed fine, except the vibration never stopped. It was faint but alive, like something pulsing beneath us. Then, at 3:15, the right hand lifted. Not much, maybe half an inch, but it lifted. Fingers relaxed, palm turning upward as if to hold something unseen. I moved quickly but calmly. Just adjusting the fabric, I told the son when he asked. He nodded, grateful not to know more. I repositioned the hand, this time using a small pin to secure the sleeve to the lining. A quiet test to see if it would move again. The minutes crawled. At 3:30, the pastor arrived, a thin, elderly man with kind eyes. He prayed quietly, then reached out and placed his hand over the deceased's. The moment contact was made, her body convulsed. Not a twitch. A violent jerk, hands clenched, shoulders rose, the head snapped sideways. The pastor stumbled back, pale and speechless. The room froze. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful, it was heavy. Like everyone's mind was trying to make sense of what they'd seen. I moved fast, stepping forward, blocking the view. It's all right, I said loud enough for all to hear. Just a shift in the platform happens sometimes. It didn't, but I needed to give them something to believe. The assistant joined me, and together we steadied the casket. The platform was still locked tight, nothing out of place, no mechanical fault. But I couldn't tell them that. We worked quickly, repositioning her body. Her hands had stiffened. I had to pry the fingers apart, one by one. Her head was angled wrong. I turned it back gently until it settled with a faint hiss of escaping air. When we were done, she looked peaceful again, exactly as she had before. Everything's secure now, I told the family. Temperature can cause slight settling. It's nothing to worry about. The son looked at me. She moved. The platform shifted, I said softly. He stared a moment longer, then nodded. People always want a reason that isn't supernatural. The service continued, quieter, tenser. The grief now carried a current of fear. By the time it ended, the vibration was still faintly there, just enough to make me feel it through the solace of my shoes. After the family left, my assistant and I stood alone. She still looked peaceful, but the air around the platform seemed to hum. What now? He asked. I hesitated. We were scheduled for burial at 9 a.m. We couldn't postpone. So we did what professionals do. We followed procedure. Checked everything once more. Repositioned, smoothed, confirmed. Then we closed the lid. Locked it. Sealed it. The vibration stopped the instant the latch clicked. I've gone over every possibility, temperature, pressure, structure. None fit. But I know what I saw. What we both saw. Tomorrow morning, I'll open that chapel again. I'll check every lock, every hinge. And when we lower that casket into the earth, I'll be praying that whatever was still moving under that platform stays buried. Some things don't need explanations. Some just need to be sealed and left beneath the ground. That's what I learned last Thursday. And that's what I'll remember the next time someone asks if their loved one looks peaceful. Tenants when something unusual happened. The woman currently renting one of the apartments, a tenant named Linda Weston, demanded access to the basement. Her tone was sharp, her eyes cold, her insistence unsettling. The landlord couldn't explain why, but something about her made his stomach twist. Most tenants wanted nothing to do with a basement. Why was she so eager to get in? The next day, suspicious and uneasy, he called the police. When inspectors arrived, they found the basement door locked from the outside. The hinges resisted, squealing as they pried it open. A wall of stench hit them instantly, thick, sour, unmistakable. It was the smell of rot, sweat, and something far worse to spare. The beam of a flashlight cut through the darkness, slicing across the cold cement floor. At first, they saw nothing. Then came a sound, a shuffle, a soft whimper, a sound no one wanted to believe came from a human throat. As the light swept across the room, the darkness revealed its secret. 4 figures crouched in the corner, their bodies twisted and frail. Skin clung to bone. Their eyes were wide and empty, as if fear itself had burned through their souls. Chains clinked softly as they shifted, startled by the sudden intrusion of light. The inspectors froze. The only sound in the room was the rattle of chains. These weren't squatters. They weren't hiding. They were prisoners. The police called for backup immediately. Within minutes, the scene became a blur of flashing lights and echoing footsteps. Officers let out 4 victims malnourished, dehydrated, shaking from cold and fear. The media would later call it the basement of horrors. But what they found there was only the beginning. The investigation quickly uncovered a story so twisted it didn't seem possible. The woman who rented the apartment, Linda Weston, wasn't a random abuser. She was a predator, one who had turned cruelty into a career. Her targets? The weak, the lonely, people with intellectual disabilities who had no family to fight for them. She lured them in with promises of care, a roof, food, companionship, but what waited for them inside her home was hell. Once they trusted her, she took everything. Their ID cards, their social security checks, their freedom. She locked them away in basements, attics, and closets. They became invisible ghosts in the city, hidden beneath the noise of everyday life. Authorities discovered that Linda wasn't acting alone. Her partners, Gregory Thomas and Eddie Wright, helped her trap and control the victims. Together, they moved from state to state, Florida, Virginia, Texas, repeating the same nightmare wherever they went. In each city, a handful of people disappeared quietly. Some were found alive. Some weren't found at all. The victims in Philadelphia had been locked in that basement for months. They were fed scraps stale bread, uncooked noodles, spoiled leftovers. A bucket in the corner served as a toilet. The air was thick with mold and human waste. They slept on torn mattresses crawling with insects. Every day was the same routine of hunger, pain, and silence. One survivor later told investigators, "I stopped counting the days. I thought I'd die down there." Their bodies bore the evidence: scars from chains, bruises from beatings, infections from neglect. They had been stripped not only of their dignity but of their very humanity. As detectives pieced the story together, they found a chilling paper trail. Bank accounts under Linda Weston's name received deposits from Social Security funds belonging to her victims. Documents in the apartment listed the personal details of dozens of people, names, birth dates, benefit numbers. It was proof of a human trafficking and fraud operation built entirely on suffering. Linda Weston wasn't just abusing people. She was profiting from their pain. She saw human lives as paychecks replaceable, expendable, and worth less than the paper their signatures were written on. But there was something even darker buried in her past. When detectives dug into her history, they uncovered another horrifying chapter, one that predated the basement by more than a decade. In 1981, Weston had been charged with killing her own sister's boyfriend. He was starved to death, locked in a closet. The victim's cause of death was ruled as malnutrition and dehydration. Linda served 8 years in prison. 8 years, and when she was released, she went right back to finding victims. It wasn't the first time, and Philadelphia wouldn't be the last. As investigators tracked her movements, they began to realize how far the horror reached. Over the years, Weston had moved across multiple states, collecting victims like trophies. In each city, the pattern repeated. She'd gain their trust, isolate them, strip them of identity, and drain their money. Some victims were found barely alive. Others simply vanished, their Social Security payments still being cashed. When police raided her other hideouts, they found IDs and documents belonging to more than 50 people, 50 names, 50 lives. Each one a potential victim of the same quiet evil. By the time the case went to trial, the details were so shocking that even hardened detectives struggled to read the reports. One officer described the basement scene as something out of a war zone. Another said it was the most depraved act of greed I've ever seen. In court, Linda Weston showed no emotion, no tears, no apologies. When witnesses described how she beat and starved her captives, she sat expressionless, eyes cold and distant. Even her own relatives testified against her. They told the court how she manipulated everyone around her, charming when it suited her, cruel when it didn't. Prosecutors painted her as a mastermind, a woman who turned compassion into control and weakness into profit. The list of charges read like a horror novel: kidnapping, conspiracy, assault, fraud, murder, racketeering. Each word another scar in the story of her victims. In 2015, Linda Weston pleaded guilty to avoid the death penalty. Her sentence: life in prison without parole. Her accomplices, Thomas and Wright, received decades-long sentences of their own. But even after justice was served, something about the case refused to rest. Because for every victim rescued, there might have been another who wasn't. Investigators couldn't say how many had died in her care, how many checks she decashed for people long gone. There were gaps, missing files, unanswered questions. Neighbors later admitted they'd noticed strange things: boarded up windows, muffled cries at night, a foul odor that lingered no matter how often the trash was taken out. They didn't say anything. Maybe they were afraid. Maybe they didn't want to get involved. But their silence allowed the horror to last as long as it did. The victims who survived faced years of recovery. Some struggled to adjust to freedom after so much darkness. Simple things: sunlight, clean water, fresh air, felt foreign. They'd lived so long in fear that peace itself felt dangerous. One survivor said she still wakes up at night, afraid she's back in the basement. And yet, they endured. They survived. Not because of Linda Weston's mercy, but because of their own will to live, their fragile hope that one day someone would open the door. The story of the Basement of Horrors isn't just a crime story. It's a mirror reflecting how easily society forgets those who need protection most. These victims were invisible for years. People saw them but didn't look, heard them but didn't listen. It wasn't just one woman's cruelty that kept them imprisoned. It was neglect, collective, silent, deadly neglect. Today that basement stands empty, but the air down there still feels heavy, as if the walls remember. Because places like that don't forget. They hold echoes of chains, of cries, of footsteps above that never came soon enough. So, before you turn away, think about this. Sometimes the worst monsters aren't hiding in the woods or in ghost stories whispered around campfires. Sometimes they're ordinary people living next door, shopping in the same stores, smiling as they pass you by. And sometimes they're living right beneath your feet. What would you do if your sibling confessed to something like this? Would you help them or turn them in? Tell me in the comments. If this story stirred something in you, if it made you think about justice, neglect, or the people society forgets, don't keep it to yourself. Share it, because stories like this shouldn't fade into silence. Hit subscribe and like this video not because it's pleasant, but because it matters, because justice only exists when we refuse to look away. Everything you read about to hear really happened. Between 1997 and 2002, in a house my mother moved into right after my parents' divorce. I was only 7 then. The youngest of 3. My mom moved us into her parents' old place, a big 3-story house they'd left behind years ago. It was supposed to be a fresh start. Quiet neighborhood, big rooms, and a huge yard. On paper, it was perfect. It was fall. The air was crisp and cool, with that slight bite you feel on your skin just before winter sets in. Around the house, orange and red leaves carpeted the ground, and the faint smell of wet earth mixed with distant bonfires hung in the air. The evenings were dim early, with long shadows stretching across the yard as the sun set, and the faint rustle of leaves brushing against the windows. The house had 3 floors: the basement, the main level, and the top floor where the kids slept. The basement was enormous, like some kind of underground maze. None of us liked going down there. Even the dog refused to step onto the basement stairs. She'd growl, back away, or just sit and stare at the door, like she knew something we didn't. At first, we thought it was just an old house giving off creepy vibes. The usual creaks, drafts, and low, buzzing lights. But then it started. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps echoing from the basement way up through the house. Each step sounded like it was carrying weight, creaking the wooden steps as if something heavy was rising. The footsteps would climb up the stairs, stopping outside our bedroom doors, sometimes outside my sister's door, sometimes mine. Every time the air turned cold, the dog would tense up, growling low in her throat. No one ever saw who or what was making the sound, but the feeling was impossible to shake. Lights in the house flickered or shut off on their own. Objects shifted positions between rooms. And on certain nights, deep, dragging noises echoed from the basement, like furniture being pulled across the floor. One night, we were playing with our walkie-talkies. Remember those old toys? We suddenly cut through static and caught a man's voice. Calm, almost eerily casual, it whispered my sister's name and told her it was going to hurt her. It repeated her name over and over, like it was enjoying hearing it. We shut the walkies off immediately. Seconds later, the dog burst into the room, barking wildly at nothing, fixating on the hallway. She was frozen, whining and growling at something invisible. That night was the start of things getting worse. Not long after, I was upstairs alone, and I heard pounding footsteps thundering up from the basement. This time not slow, but fast, angry, and heavy, shaking the floorboards as they neared my door. Then, with a slam that made the whole wall shake, my bedroom door snapped shut. I yelled for my mom. She ran up, pulling and shaking the door, but it wouldn't open. There was no lock, and the knob turned uselessly. She went to grab tools, but before she returned, the door unlocked itself and creaked open slowly, like someone had just let go from the other side. That summer, a thunderstorm roared outside. With my sisters away, it was just my mom and me. In the middle of the night, the basement erupted in chaos, furniture scraping, glass shattering, and thuds bouncing through the house. The footsteps started again, running up and down the stairs like an unseen animal pacing in fury. We huddled on the couch, frozen with fear. Then, the front door slammed open and shut repeatedly, rhythmic, deliberate. It was like someone was pacing in and out of the house on purpose. By morning, we found shattered glass and overturned furniture in the basement. After that, strange things just kept happening. Cold spots in rooms, whispers that carried no clear words, doors closing or locking on their own. Every time the dog wasn't home, the phenomena worsened. It was like whatever was in that house hated being ignored. My oldest sister swore she saw it once, or thought she did. An old man standing at the foot of her bed, silently watching her sleep. She never told us much beyond that. We stayed in that house for 5 years, but we didn't take much with us when we left. Mom never spoke about it again, but my friend says he can still hear those footsteps in his dreams. Slow, creaking stairs climbing from the basement, stopping just outside his door. They never knew who or what made the sound. They only knew one thing: whatever was in that basement never left. It was Thanksgiving break, that one time of year when life slows down just enough to feel familiar again. I had just gotten home from college, and like always, my old group of friends decided to meet up. There was Adam, Jack, Luke, Brandon, Mario, and me. We'd been close since middle school, and even though life had scattered us to different campuses, whenever we came home, we picked up right where we left off. That night, we gathered at Mario's house. His place was always the go-to because his parents were rarely home, and his basement was practically built for nights like that. Big, carpeted, warm, and tucked away from the rest of the world. Outside, the air smelled like wet leaves and chimney smoke. You could hear the faint hum of wind moving through bare branches, that kind of late fall quiet that makes every small sound feel louder than it should. Inside, though, everything felt cozy. We were drinking, telling stories, catching up on college drama. It was normal, safe, until it wasn't. Around midnight, someone suggested we hit a club downtown. I didn't want to go, partly because I'm always the designated driver, but mostly because I had this weird feeling in my stomach all night. I can't explain it. The basement just felt different that evening, like something was waiting, but after enough pestering, I agreed. I went upstairs to grab my car keys from the kitchen counter. The house was dim and quiet, that heavy silence you only get in big houses after midnight. That's when the lights cut out. Everything went black for a few seconds. I froze, waiting for my eyes to adjust. Then, just as suddenly, the lights flickered back on. I laughed nervously to myself, blaming the wind or an old circuit, grabbed the keys, and headed back downstairs. But when I reached the bottom of the stairs, I stopped dead in my tracks. The basement was silent, empty. No laughter, no chatter, nothing. The beer bottles were still on the table. The music was still paused on someone's phone. But my friends were gone. At first, I thought they were trying to scare me. We used to pull that kind of stuff in high school. I called out, checked the back door, the garage. All their cars were still parked outside. I called each of their phones, one by one. Every single call went to voicemail. Except Mario's. His phone was lying on the coffee table, vibrating as it rang. That's when I heard it, a soft giggle from somewhere in the room. It sounded like one of the guys trying to hold back laughter, but it wasn't quite right. It was higher, breathier, like someone pretending to be human and not quite getting it right. I turned slowly, scanning the room. The giggle came again, closer this time. "All right, very funny," I said. My voice cracked halfway through. Silence, then footsteps. Slow, deliberate, circling me. The lights went out again. I could hear my own breathing. And under it, someone else's, right behind me. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe. Then the footsteps stopped. When the lights flickered back on, there was no one there. Just me and that heavy, pressing silence. I ran. I didn't even look back. Just sprinted out the front door and drove home like my life depended on it. The next morning, Mario's dad texted me, asking if I knew where everyone went. He said their cars were still there, and their stuff was untouched. By evening, the police were involved. They questioned me for hours, took me back to the house. Everything looked the same, half-finished drinks, a deck of cards, Mario's phone on the table. One of the officers took it for analysis. Later, they told me Mario had sent a message right before midnight. It was random letters and symbols, almost like he'd been typing in a hurry. At least that's what I thought, until one of the investigators said it wasn't gibberish. It was Latin. The translation? We were not alone, and the part that still keeps me awake. When they checked the phone's GPS, that message wasn't sent from the basement. It was sent 30 minutes after I'd left, from the woods behind Mario's house. Peek into view again. By about 9 a.m., the sun had burned off the fog, and the heat was rising fast. Sweat dripped down my forehead as I finished the last headstone at the bottom of the hill. I clicked off the trimmer and took out my earbuds. For a second, the world seemed to hold its breath. Then I saw her. A little girl. She appeared at the top of the hill, just where the ground dipped out of sight. She was wearing a bright red dress, old-fashioned looking, the kind you see in photographs from another era. Her hair was dark and glossy, tied with a ribbon. She couldn't have been more than 3 or 4. She was running, her small feet barely making a sound on the grass. Before I could say anything, she darted behind one of the larger headstones and disappeared. I blinked. My first thought was simple. She must be with someone. Maybe her parents were visiting another grave. Maybe she got bored and wandered off. The cemetery wasn't near any houses, and no child that well-dressed would have just walked out there on her own. Still, a knot tightened in my stomach. I climbed the hill quickly, calling out as I went. "Hey, sweetheart, where's your mom or dad?" My voice felt too loud in the morning stillness. When I reached the top, my heart dropped. There was no one, no car parked at the gate. No adults wandering the rows. Just headstones and heat shimmering off the grass. I turned in a slow circle. Nothing. I could see the headstone she'd run behind. From where I stood, I should have been able to see her if she'd run off again, but the space was empty. My hands went clammy on the trimmer handle. I called out again, louder this time. "Hello, little girl? It's okay, you can come out." Silence. A low breeze moved through the oaks, rattling leaves like whispered words. That's when my stomach flipped. Something felt off. I pulled my phone out and called my mom. She picked up on the second ring. "Yeah? Mom, there's a little girl here. I think she's lost. She was wearing a red dress. I don't see anyone else around. Should I call the police? There was a pause on the line. Then she asked, almost casually, was she wearing a red dress? Yes. My voice cracked a little. Why? Another pause. Then, in the most matter-of-fact tone imaginable, she said, "Oh, that's just the ghost girl." I went cold. The what? The ghost girl, she repeated, like she was telling me we were out of milk. Don't worry about it. I stared out over the graves, my heart pounding. Mom, are you kidding me right now? There's a ghost in the cemetery and you didn't tell me? I needed your help, she said. I was afraid you wouldn't go up there if you thought it was haunted. I almost laughed, but it came out shaky. You're right. I wouldn't have gone up here by myself. You're fine, she said. She won't bother you. I ended the call and stood there for a minute, staring at the headstone the girl had vanished behind. My throat was dry. I've never liked ghost stories. I don't mess with that stuff. And now here I was, alone in the cemetery at 9 in the morning, supposedly sharing space with a dead child. I'd packed up my equipment faster than I ever had in my life. By the time I reached the truck, my hands were trembling. I never saw her again. Even now, years later, I still go to that cemetery sometimes. I have relatives buried there, but I'm never alone. Always with someone, even if it's just for company. When I think back on that morning, it's strange. The memory feels crystal clear sunlight, dew, red dress, the flash of her running. But it also feels like a dream I only half remember. Did I really see her? Was it a trick of the light? I don't know. I've heard other stories since then. People say cemeteries hold memories, echoes. Some think ghosts get tethered to places where they died or buried. That girl, if she was real, must have lived long ago. The dress alone said as much. But part of me wonders if she was just a fragment, something caught between worlds. Not dangerous, not malicious. Just there. Still, every time I visit, I find my eyes drifting toward that old section on the slope. Toward the big headstone where she vanished. I never see anything, but my stomach knots just the same. My mom still teases me about it sometimes. Remember the ghost girl? She say with a smirk. And I'll roll my eyes, but my skin prickles, because I do remember. I remember the heavy summer air, the hush of the cemetery, the flash of red against the green grass. And I remember the way my heart stopped when she disappeared. When I was in middle school, my dad did something that sounded, at the time, both kind of boring and kind of weird. He bought a cemetery. Yeah, a whole cemetery. Most kids' parents were buying houses, cars, maybe a camper. My dad went straight for acres of grass, rows of headstones, and crypts built long before I was even born. And because it was a family venture, lucky me, I started working for him not long after. All through high school, until graduation, my summers and weekends were spoken for. I wasn't flipping burgers, or bagging groceries, or washing cars. Nope, I was mowing around graves, trimming weeds between marble slabs, and cleaning up flower beds where families had left their grief in the form of plastic arrangements that would never die. It sounds creepy, right? But here's the thing. Aside from the occasional weird moment, the shadows you catch out of the corner of your eye, the sudden feeling that someone's standing behind you, or the faint sound of voices where no one is, it was actually peaceful, still, almost meditative. The place had its own rhythm, wind sweeping through trees. The low hum of my mower, birds darting between stones. It became so normal to me that I forgot sometimes that I was working among the dead. But then there were the crypts. Now that was different. See, most people think of burials as digging a hole, lowering a casket, tossing in some dirt, job done. And yeah, that happens. But there were also these family crypts. Underground chambers built decades ago, back when big families wanted a permanent spot to rest together. To get to them, you didn't just dig a grave. You had to dig down 4 or 5 feet until you hit giant cement doors. Imagine an underground vault, sealed tight, waiting for someone to pry it open. I remember the first time I saw one. We were preparing for a burial, and Dad had me help. We dug down, shovelful after shovelful, until my shovel scraped concrete. I brushed away dirt, and there they were. Massive, gray cement slabs covering the entrance. You don't just knock on those and walk in. You have to pull the doors off. Heavy, stubborn things that had been sealed for decades. And then, when they finally shift and slide open, there's this stale breath of air that escapes. Dry, cool, dusty. The kind of air that hasn't moved in 50 years. Then comes the part that really sticks with you. You climb down, drop into this little room cut into the earth, big enough for 2 coffins or, well, more than 2 if cremation's involved. Back in the 50s and 60s, families would buy a single crypt and everyone would eventually join in. Parents, kids, cousins' ashes packed into urns, stacked, tucked, arranged in neat rows. Some families kept it simple, just urns, stone, silence. But others? They turned the crypt into a kind of shrine. And let me tell you, there's nothing stranger than opening one of those after half a century. Picture this. You hop down inside, flashlight in hand, expecting dust and stone. Instead, you find melted candles still clinging to holders, long burned down to waxy nubs. Faded photographs propped in corners, faces smiling at you through yellowed film. Old letters, souvenirs, dried flowers that crumble if you so much as breathe on them. Little pieces of people's lives, frozen in time underground. The first time I saw that, my stomach twisted. It was intimate in a way that felt wrong. Like you'd step into someone's living room uninvited, except everyone who used to sit there had been gone for decades. And then there's the other thing, the part that hits you all at once when you re-standing down there. You are at their level. Eye to eye, shoulder to shoulder, surrounded by remains. The walls don't just feel close. They feel aware. It's hard to explain unless you've been in one of those crypts yourself, but the sensation is immediate. You're not the only one in the room. I never got used to it. I could mow 100 rows of graves in the hot sun and feel nothing but sweat dripping down my back, but the crypts? Every time we opened one, I felt that cold little knot in my stomach. I learned to mask it, though. Dad was practical. To him, it was just work. Move the stone, clean it up, make room, get it done. He didn't dwell on candles or photographs. He didn't mention the way the air seemed to press in on you down there. And I didn't bring it up. I just swallowed hard, did what I had to do, and climbed back out as fast as possible. Looking back now, I think that work changed the way I see death. Not in some dramatic Gothic way. Just practically. Death isn't abstract when you spend your weekends weed-eating around headstones. It isn't hidden when you climb down into a vault lined with urns. It's present, tangible, and yet, strangely enough, I also learned how ordinary it could feel. How quiet. Sometimes I'd stop the mower for a second, pull off my gloves, and just sit on a stone bench. The cemetery stretched out around me, all names and dates and memories carved into marble. Shadows shifted across the grass. A breeze lifted through the trees, and instead of fear, I'd feel a strange calm, like the world had slowed down to a pace I could finally keep up with. Of course, there were moments that snapped me out of it. The quick flicker of a shadow darting between graves when no one else was around. The sound of footsteps on gravel behind me, only to turn and find empty space. Once I swore I heard a woman's voice humming, faint and low, carried on the breeze. No one else was there. Little things, always little. Enough to make your skin prickle, but not enough to prove anything. I told myself it was just my imagination, because really, what else can you do? When I graduated high school, I moved on. College, jobs, life beyond the cemetery. My dad eventually sold the place, and I stopped spending my summers with dirt under my nails and the buzz of the weed eater in my ears. But sometimes I think about it. About the way the air smelled when the cement doors slid open. About the quiet weight of those underground rooms. About the photographs still propped there long after the people in them had been forgotten by everyone but the stone. It's strange. Most kids my age were worried about exams or homecoming. I was down in crypts, eye to eye with history, realizing how thin the line is between the living and the dead. And if I'm honest, sometimes I miss it. Not the eerie parts, not the crypts or the shadows, but the stillness. The way the world seemed to pause in that place. I learned that cemeteries aren't just about endings. They're about memory, about the quiet persistence of being remembered, even when everything else fades. But don't get me wrong. If you asked me today to climb back down into one of those crypts, squeeze myself between urns and melted candles and 50 years of silence, yeah, hard pass. I used to work for the county cemetery department years ago. Not the most glamorous job, but it had its moments. Most of the time, it was simple work mowing, trimming, keeping things from looking too wild. The county had dozens of little cemeteries scattered across fields and back roads, some well-kept, others practically forgotten. We were the ones who kept them in shape, but every so often, something unusual would happen. See, it wasn't uncommon for people, usually farmers, to stumble across old headstones on their property. Sometimes a single marker leaning at an odd angle, sometimes a cluster hidden in trees. When that happened, we'd get a call. We'd go out, poke the ground with dowel rods, and see if we could find more stones buried beneath the dirt. That was the process. Locate the graves, map them out, and re-establish the cemetery. It sounds strange, but these places slip out of memory over time. What was once a small community plot ends up swallowed by woods or hidden by crops, waiting for someone with sharp eyes and a bit of curiosity. Soon after I started working there, we got one of those calls. A farmer had been clearing a path through some trees along the edge of his field. He wanted easier access for his equipment. While he was working, he spotted a few stones tucked under the brush. Not natural rocks, either. He could tell they were carved. Weathered, but carved. He called it in, and we loaded up the truck. When we got there, I remember the place felt different from the start. The trees were thick, twisted together like they'd been growing undisturbed for centuries. Branches wove overhead, filtering the sunlight into strange, shifting patterns. The air was cooler inside that stand of trees, heavy and still. We started probing the ground with dowel rods, pushing them into the soil and feeling for resistance. It didn't take long to find more. Here and there little thuds, each one marking a buried stone. Piece by piece, we realized it wasn't just a couple of graves, it was a whole cemetery. And not just any cemetery, the oldest one in the county. The dates on the headstones went back to the 1700s. Some were broken, some so eroded you had to tilt them in just the right light to read the names. But enough remained legible to tell us this wasn't just a family plot. It had been something bigger. That's when the research started. We looked into the names, cross-referenced old county records, dug through archives. What we found was unsettling. Before the cemetery had been there, the land had held a schoolhouse. Not much of a building by modern standards, just a one-room school. The teachers were a husband and wife pair. Their students were children from the nearby farming families. Something happened there. The details were fuzzy, lost to time, but the story was clear enough to send a shiver down my spine. The records suggested an outbreak. Some kind of illness swept through the school. Quarantine measures were harsh back then. Once sickness entered a space, people believed it had to be sealed off. And that's what happened. The children and their teachers were kept inside. They were isolated, cut off from the outside world, left to face whatever fate the illness carried. They all died. Every last one of them. The schoolhouse was torn down afterward. The bodies were buried right there on the same ground. Husband, wife, students. And that patch of land became a cemetery. Knowing that changed the way I looked at those stones. At first, they were just markers, old marble slabs half swallowed by earth. But once I knew, I couldn't shake the image. Rows of children, teachers trying to comfort them as the days dragged on. Fear clinging to the air inside that wooden room. The walls holding in the coughs, the cries, the silence that eventually followed. And then, nothing but the woods growing over it all. Working in cemeteries, you get used to the quiet. But that place had a heavier quiet. Not peaceful, not serene. Something else. The kind of silence that presses down, like the ground itself is holding a story it doesn't want to tell. I remember walking between the stones as we cleared brush. my boots crunching on old leaves, sunlight flickering through gaps in the trees. Every so often, I thought I heard something, just a small sound, faint and quick, like a whisper carried on the wind or the shuffle of footsteps behind me. Each time I turned, there was nothing, just shadows shifting across the ground. I told myself it was the atmosphere playing tricks on me, and maybe it was, but I've worked plenty of cemeteries. This one felt different. Even the farmer who found it seemed uneasy. He came by once while we were working, stood at the edge of the trees, arms folded. He didn't walk in, just stared. He finally said, "Never knew this was here," and left. We restored what we could. Cleaned up the stones, marked the perimeter, made a record. The county wanted it documented, cataloged, protected. But after that, we didn't go back often. It wasn't a cemetery that saw visitors. No flowers, no new burials, no fresh footprints. Just the past, sealed under layers of dirt and silence. To this day, it sticks with me. Out of all the cemeteries I worked in, big ones, small ones, family plots, churchyards, that was the only one that unsettled me long after I left. There's something about tragedy that lingers in a place. You can mow the grass, straighten the stones, make everything look tidy, but the story remains, the air remembers. And sometimes, if you're quiet enough, you can almost hear it. Solid minutes waiting for a repeat. Nothing. I didn't sleep all night. By midnight, I paced slowly across the room, constantly glancing at the casket. The air thickened as if the room was shrinking around me. My breath echoed too loudly. The thermostat read 74 degrees, but cold goosebumps covered me. The metal on the casket had a faint fog, though I hadn't touched it or sat down. At exactly 12:17 a.m., I froze mid-step, heard a soft creak from the casket hinges. Just one, then silence. I stepped a few feet back, heart pounding, eyes fixed. The lid didn't open, nothing moved, but I didn't dare blink. I decided I needed fresh air and walked toward the hallway that led to the break room and restroom. The viewing door was cracked open behind me. The hallway felt wrong, too warm, with a faint scent of iron and dust. I flipped the light switch, but nothing happened. Only the red glow of an exit sign lit the carpet ahead. Frozen, I debated returning to the room when a dragging sound scraped across the carpet behind me, long and slow. I turned sharply. Nothing. The casket room door was still open and the lamp lit. No sign of movement or anyone else, but I could feel the presence behind me in my spine. I walked backward, eyes on the door, and locked it. I refused to open anything anymore. My heart thudded as I sensed something had changed. I checked the casket. It was shut, but the lamp next to it dimmed further as if the bulb was dying. The shadows in the corners stretched longer. I could feel eyes on me. Minutes later, I heard breathing again inside the room. It was faint but steady, like someone asleep. The casket lid remained closed. I stepped back, the space feeling unbalanced now. I stood behind the chair, unsure whether to flee or stay. Then the breathing stopped, replaced by something worse, a low whisper. It wasn't words, but a moaning hum coming from between the walls. I backed toward the door and reached for my phone to call for help, but it was dead. The screen was black. I checked the cord. It was unplugged. I hadn't moved it. Just before 1 a.m., the casket creaked again. This time there was a faint cap fingernails brushing under the lid. Once, then again, I froze, scared to even breathe. I don't know how long I stayed frozen, but eventually my legs forced movement. I backed into the corner near the lamp, crouching to make myself smaller. The tapping stopped. A heavy silence filled the room, every noise waiting. Then the light flickered once, twice. On the third flicker, I swear the shadows moved, not just shifting, but separating from the walls. The darkness gained weight, and I felt something standing behind me, unseen. I turned, but saw nothing. Shaking, I grabbed the chair and sat down. That's when I noticed the casket lid slightly ajar, cracked an inch or two. I got up slowly, eyes locked on the gap. Nothing emerged, no hand, no movement, but the room's pressure was unbearable, like a storm about to break. I tried to convince myself the lid wasn't always latched, but the whispering returned, clearer now, a muffled, wet rustling sound that crawled over my skin. I pressed my hand against the switch for the hallway lights. This time they came on, a warm yellow glow spilled across the carpet. Still, my legs wouldn't move. The thought of stepping out felt worse. The clock read 2:14 a.m., almost 4 hours left to endure. I had to choose, leave and never explain why, or stay and face whatever was in that room. I sank back into the chair, hoping to wait it out. Suddenly, the air chilled so fast I could see my breath. The lamp flickered one last time and died. Only the hallway light glowed beyond the door. The casket gave a soft click, the lid shut itself. I didn't move again for a long time. Eventually, I must have passed out from fear or exhaustion. When I woke, sunlight bled through frosted glass above the door. The casket was shut. Silence blanketed the room. The man returned just after 7 a.m. "Everything okay?" he asked. I nodded but lied. I didn't trust myself to speak. He handed me the rest of the money and locked the casket tight with a key from his coat. I left town 2 days later, taking a job stocking shelves in Dallas. I never told anyone about that night until now. But sometimes, when it's cold and quiet, I still hear the whispers if I sit too long. I never discovered why the body couldn't be left alone. The funeral home closed 6 months later, a family matter, they said. All I know is whatever I sat with that night wasn't asleep. I've worked at a cemetery for over 15 years now. My official title is Cemetery Operations Coordinator, but most people just call me the cemetery manager. My job involves a bit of everything: scheduling funerals, meeting grieving families, selling burial plots, and making sure every service goes smoothly from start to finish. It's not a job for everyone. You need patience, compassion, and a strong stomach. And sometimes you need to know when to keep certain things to yourself. This story happened about 4 years ago. I still remember it vividly because, out of all my years working in cemeteries, this was the only time I ever truly questioned what I saw and what I believed. A man named Antonio came into the office one Monday morning. He was in his early 30s, Hispanic, with kind eyes and a heavy accent. The kind of person you can tell has a good heart just from the few words. He wanted to buy a plot for his father, who was in hospice care. His father was terminally ill, and Antonio wanted to have everything ready in advance so his family wouldn't have to deal with the paperwork when the time came. As he sat across from me, he kept showing me photos on his phone, pictures of his dad from family gatherings, birthdays, barbecues. In every photo, the man looked happy and warm. Too young to be leaving the world. I could tell Antonio loved him deeply. And when he said, "I just want to make sure my father's spirit rests easy," I felt that in my chest. Unfortunately, his father passed away just a few days later. Antonio came back that Friday to finalize the arrangements. The funeral was scheduled for the next day. The day of the funeral, it rained like I hadn't seen in months. Thick sheets of water came down nonstop, lightning flashing in the distance, thunder rumbling every few minutes. Around here, people say that when it rains during a burial, it's a sign of good luck, that the heavens are welcoming the soul. I was standing under the front awning of our main office when the funeral procession arrived. The hearse pulled up first, followed by a small line of cars. In the second car, I saw Antonio behind the wheel. Even through the rain, I could see his red eyes. He waved. I waved back. When the time came, I followed them to the burial site in one of our pickup trucks. Part of my job is to oversee every funeral and make sure everything runs smoothly. The service itself went as expected. Emotional, quiet, respectful. A priest said a few words, the casket was lowered, and the family said their final goodbyes under a sea of umbrellas. When everyone left, I did what I always do, one last drive around the property before heading back to the office. It was close to 5 p.m., and the rain was still coming down hard. Our cemetery closes at 5:30, so I started making my final rounds. Most days, I just drive the perimeter, check for visitors, and make sure the gates can be locked without anyone left inside. As I drove past one of the older sections, something caught my eye. About 50 yards ahead, through the rain, I saw someone walking between the rows of tombstones. It was quick, just a shadowy figure, hurrying down one of the lanes before disappearing behind a hedge. At first, I thought it might have been a family member who stayed behind. I honked my horn to let them know we were closing soon, but the figure didn't reappear. So I parked the truck, grabbed my umbrella, and stepped out into the storm. The wind was cold. The rain felt like needles against my face as I made my way down the same path. I turned the corner where I'd last seen them, and there was no one. I scanned the area for a good 20 minutes, checked behind the hedge, between tombstones, even around a small maintenance shed nearby. Nothing, not a soul. By that point, I was soaked and irritated, so I gave up and went back to the office. Inside, I decided to check the security cameras just to make sure I hadn't missed someone. We have several cameras covering most of the grounds, and I pulled up the live feeds on the monitors behind my desk. But because of the storm, the footage was mostly useless. The rain blurred everything, and the low light made it almost impossible to make out details. Still, I sat there scanning the screens while finishing up paperwork, half watching, half listening to the sound of thunder outside. Then I heard it. The front door slammed shut. Not just a gust of wind, a loud, deliberate slam like someone had walked in or out. I froze for a second before standing up. "Hello?" I called out. No answer. I walked into the lobby. The front door was closed, the lights flickering slightly from the storm. No one was there. Maybe someone had come in to ask for help and then left quickly. I checked the side hallway, the visitation room, even the restroom. All empty. That's when I walked back toward my desk and something outside the window caught my eye. Someone was standing there, directly outside, staring in at me. His face was pale, expressionless, his hair slicked down from the rain. I stumbled backward, my heart jumping to my throat. For a second, I couldn't even move. Then, as I looked closer, I realized something that made my blood run cold. I recognized him. It was Antonio's father. The same face from the photos Antonio had shown me just days earlier. Same mustache. Same kind eyes, only now they were empty. I blinked, and in that split second he was gone. I burst out of the office door, yelling, "Hey!" into the storm, spinning around to check the sides of the building. There was no one. No footprints in the mud. Nothing but the sound of rain pounding against the ground. I stood there for a few seconds, drenched, shaking, staring out at the empty cemetery. Then I did something I almost never do. I locked up early. I packed my things, shut down the monitors, locked the office doors, and drove out through the main gate. I opened it, pulled through, locked it again behind me, and sped off toward home. When I got home, my wife noticed I was quieter than usual. She asked what was wrong, and I just told her, "Long day?" That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying what I'd seen over and over in my head. Maybe I was tired. Maybe my mind was playing tricks on me. But the one thing that kept bothering me, the way he looked at me, he wasn't angry. He wasn't lost. He just looked sad, like he wanted something. For days afterward, I tried to convince myself it was exhaustion, stress, or just a trick of the light through the rain. But every time I closed my eyes, I could still see him, that blank stare through the window pane. And the strange thing is, I never told Antonio. He still comes by sometimes to visit his father's grave. He always waves at me when he leaves, and I wave back, just like that rainy day. But every time he does, I can't help but wonder, the day of that storm, was his father really gone? Or was he waiting to say goodbye one last time? I still remember that night like it was yesterday. It was one of those jobs you don't forget no matter how long you've been in this line of work. I'd been working at the funeral home for a few years by then, used to the silence and the stillness, to the smells and the somber faces. But this one was different. The call came in late afternoon. A young man, early 20s, had been the victim of a brutal attack. The police were done with the scene, and now it was up to us to prepare him for his final goodbye. His name was Michael. I didn't know him, never met him, but somehow it felt like I should. Maybe because his story was etched into every inch of that quiet room. Preparing a body is usually straightforward clinical, in a way. You wash, dress, and do your best to make the person look peaceful again. But with Michael, the room felt different the moment I stepped in. Cold. Not just the chill the refrigeration unit gave off, but a deep, bone-deep cold that wrapped around you like a wet blanket. It was unsettling. I'd been doing this long enough to expect some weirdness. Ghost stories are as common in funeral homes as flowers, but this was raw and close, like being caught in a sudden storm. My breath fogged in front of me, and I found myself pulling my jacket tighter, even though the thermostat said things were fine. I started gently, cleaning Michael's face first. His skin was pale, but oddly warm, like he'd just fallen asleep, not met a violent end. His eyes remained closed, and I couldn't help but notice the faint bruising, the anger held in those quiet marks. They told a story I never wanted to hear. As I worked, I heard soft whispers or maybe just the hum of the ventilation system. My eyes flicked to the corner, but there was nothing there. The feeling of not being alone grew stronger. Then, out of nowhere, I swore I heard a voice. Clear, low, and trembling like someone calling out in the dark. It wasn't from the radio or the funeral home office. It felt like it came from Michael himself. Chilling, almost pleading. I blinked, and the room fell silent again. Maybe it was my imagination. I hoped it was. After finishing the embalming rites, I dressed him in a crisp white shirt and dark jacket, the kind his younger brothers might have picked out. I'd heard they were coming to say goodbye. 2 boys, barely teenagers, left behind by something none of us should ever have to endure. As I closed the casket lid, I felt that cold again, sharper this time. My fingers froze on the latch. I swear for a moment I could see something flicker behind the closed lid, like a shadow moving or a tear on the edge of time. Later, when Michael's brothers arrived, their grief hit the room like thunder. They barely spoke, clinging to each other as if to stop the world from twisting further. I saw the way their eyes searched the closed casket as if trying to reach Michael through the wood. One of them, the older boy, paused and whispered something so soft I almost missed it. "Tell him we'll be all right." His voice cracked like dry branches in winter. I left that night shaken in a way no ghost story ever shook me. There was a heaviness in the air, a silence that was louder than any noise. Sometimes grief is a presence as real as flesh. In the days that followed, I kept thinking back to the funeral home that night. The cold that wasn't cold, the whisper that wasn't just sound. The profound sense that even in death, Michael was still trying to protect his brothers, or maybe just asking us to keep his memory alive. It's the kind of haunting that stays with you, not the scary stuff, but the quiet kind that makes you human.